Bob Iger will step down as CEO of Disney, but effective immediately. Investors have reason to be surprised. Iger had recently signed an extension to his contract. The former head of Disney Parks, Bob Chapek, will take the CEO job.
You know, the things that we're talking about as far as the coronavirus and Disney, it's the core of those four essentially parts of the Disney stool that are holding up. That includes studios, it includes consumer products. It does include the broadcast, and it certainly includes the other parts of the Disney Plus story.
And while this is certainly a bump in the road in terms of the coronavirus, we'll come through this like we've come through every other challenge that we've had.
Any possibility of them closing the parks? Yeah, I'm genuinely concerned. Where do you not want to be? In a huge crowd of people, right?
Then the dominoes started to fall.
They are closing Walt Disney World in Orlando, all because of the coronavirus.
2 months from now, it's going to be something else.
It's shocking, but shocking also in the kind of scary thing.
7 or 8% down. If it were my son asking me, he would say, "Daddy, when is it all going to be over?"
Well, everyone, here we are in lockdown quarantine mode as COVID-19 wreaks havoc on everything, and especially on Disney, which is a very globally connected brand. People have been wondering, Braden, why haven't you been making Disney news videos lately? The thing is, personally, when I cover the news, I feel like it should be upbeat, right? You know, an escape from the everyday, the normal news, all the everyday noise that's very negative. But this past month, the small bits of news that we have gotten from the parks ever since they've closed, it's just been this black smoldering cloud of the parks are closed, construction is stopping, projects are canceled, people's livelihoods are at stake. There's no sign of this ever ending. You know, it's just all this really negative stuff. And maybe it's just me, but I feel like we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel, maybe. So we're gonna talk about some of those possible scenarios where we could see the parks reopen and things get back to normal, or rather what this new normal will look like in the COVID-19 world. What is that going to be like? Now that said, still a lot of the news is in that black smoldering cloud zone, but instead of just not talking about it, I think it's better that we do talk about it, talk what's happened with construction, what construction is still happening on property, why Disney funded construction stopped in the first place. It's not directly because of the coronavirus, it's actually a bit deeper than that. We'll see how much this stop in construction could delay the projects we care most about, what Disney projects have been canceled, and we can speculate about some projects heavily endangered by what has transpired here, like the Star Wars Hotel, for instance. And even though this news still isn't great, at least it'll give you an accurate picture of everything going on with Disney and the coronavirus and what to expect moving forward. The matter of when the Disney parks reopen is really not something entirely in Disney's control. If you look at the way the parks closed, even that wasn't exactly proactive. Disney's hand was essentially forced as bans on public gathering were becoming the norm, stay-at-home orders were being talked about, flights were canceled, and remote work for employees was becoming something all the corporations were adopting. This is to say there are things beyond Disney's control, like how the spread of the virus is handled by the nation, that will be what eventually facilitates the ability for people to go out in public again, and hence the Disney parks reopen. Looking ahead as to when the parks could reopen, there are three basic potential timelines, all dependent on what happens next with the virus itself. Scenario number one is Disney reopens this summer. Coronavirus is deadlier than the flu, but it is similar to the flu in that it is a respiratory illness. The primary way scientists think the virus is spreading is via person-to-person droplets, tiny specks of water and liquid in the air created by communication, any sort of person-to-person interaction, hence the social distancing measures we've seen put in place, trying to keep people 6 feet apart at a minimum. The reason the flu has seasons is because it doesn't transmit as well this way in the summer months. Why exactly this is the case has yet to be strictly proven, but we can assume the combination of increased UV radiation and no school, which is a crucial breeding ground for things like the flu, helps hinder the transmission of the virus in the summer months. Assuming the coronavirus ends up behaving similarly, which is in no way proven, this is an optimistic scenario, by June the number of new cases should go from its current skyrocketing levels to reduced levels of new cases. The crisis would still be ongoing even in this optimistic scenario, as the cumulative number of cases and the strain on the hospitals and the supply line would continue to increase. But if there becomes a reduced risk of the virus being contracted in the summer months, actually being transmitted to you, this could give Disney the opportunity, if things went really well, to reopen the parks in some sort of seasonal capacity. Even if it's just for the season season as a means to keep the cast members paid, bring in new much-needed revenue, and give guests a break from being stuck at home. Even in this scenario, though, experts say a second fall wave of the virus could be possible, and a second wave is already feared in China, so there is some reason to be concerned even in this scenario. The second scenario is Disney reopens this fall. Another highly speculated timeline for the virus is us being about 3 months away from being able to return to basic, not high person-to-person contact activities, like perhaps spaced out tables at restaurants or working in offices in cubicles. The theory here is perhaps over the course of the summer, the number of new cases decreases, but thanks to the huge number of tests currently being administered, if we continue our current testing rates, by August, there should be a very large picture as to who has the virus and who does not. It may be possible to reopen everyday activities in some limited capacity with a good bit of confidence that those who do have the virus know that they have it and will stay at home. If that speculated fall wave of the virus never comes, it makes this scenario even more possible. This timeline is becoming less likely though, as recently the CDC doctors have reported that up to 25% of those with the virus could be asymptomatic spreaders indefinitely, meaning they will never show symptoms, likely never have any reason to be tested, and continue to spread the virus to more people. This has been used this past week as justification as to why now they're recommending everyone wear face masks in public. But perhaps even if you factor all these detractors in, perhaps a summer or fall opening for Disney is still possible, but instead of returning to the normal that we've had in the past, we return to the new normal, and that would probably look like a masked world where people in the parks are wearing face masks. That might be a big help. And then the third scenario is Disney is closed for the year. A big problem with the coronavirus situation is the only real way to stop it is for most of the population to get it. This is what's called herd immunity. And all the talk you're hearing about a vaccine and things like that, that would just all aid in our ability to get to herd immunity faster. And given how far away that is, it's likely we'll probably be near herd immunity before there's even a vaccine ready. That herd immunity is what we have with the flu. For us to achieve this, experts estimate somewhere between 60 to 80% of the population will have to contract the virus, and that is the real reason we are inside. We are inside to slow the rate at which we reach that level of permeation of this virus. If 80% of the population got this virus all at once, it would be terrible, as there wouldn't be enough resources to care for all the people. So by spreading out the rate at which everyone gets it, eventually we will reach that herd immunity. But if we do it at a controlled rate, we control the spread, that means that people can get the care that they need, and therefore there's a lower mortality rate. All this says to me personally, we could just be stuck inside forever, for a very long time, right? Where they just say, oh, we're extending it till April. Oh, we're extending it till May. You know, they just keep extending it another month, another month, another month. Because even if the CDC has already decided that we're gonna be inside for a very long time, they wouldn't say, hey, you're stuck inside the rest of the year, because if they were to say that, that is way too far away. People would go crazy. So instead we do these things where it's in little bits of time, where there's sort of like hope dangled in front of us. The idea of Disney being closed for the rest of the year, of course we don't want to see that happen, but it's not really a crazy idea as far as the travel industry is concerned. They are very much impacted by things like this. It takes a long time to recover. And if you look at cruises, like Carnival cruises, of course the cruises are more affected than the parks, but still, I do think the fact that you're already seeing this happen in the travel industry, it does make it something worth talking about as far as Disney is concerned, as a real possibility. The problem I see is the rate of spread and the mortality rate associated with that. It isn't the only factor to worry about. You know, a lot of people, when they hear the idea of let's get back to work, let's get everyone back to work, they say, who cares what the billionaires want? We're not doing that. We're the workers. We don't want to get sick, right? I'm not going to leave the house. So when you hear someone saying, hey, we all need to get back to work, you sort of think that person's heartless, right? So many people would be put at risk with the virus in a scenario like that. But if you really think about it, unemployment, people not being able to pay rent and pay for things, people not being able to produce things, people not being able to buy products, those would cause issues just as big or perhaps even bigger than those caused by the virus itself. So there very likely has to come a time soon where you start slowly easing back into work and limited public activities, even if there is risk associated with that, just simply because the alternative, the cost of keeping everyone inside indefinitely, so many people unemployed, that is not a good scenario for anyone. The other issue with all these time frames and when Disney will reopen is employment. It may all seem like one beautiful, well-oiled machine that's magical when you're there, but believe it or not, Walt Disney World requires a massive amount of people to make possible and to operate. Disney has already sent the college program kids home, and I believe that was somewhere around 22,000 cast members that are no longer working at the resort or capable of working at the resort because they had been sent home. And now Disney's furloughing non-union hourly employees and salaried employees, leaving just the union employees that have yet to be furloughed, and I'm sure they're close behind. And while this is terrible, and I feel terrible for all the cast members that are going through this, Disney should be commended on how long they've been able to, without any revenue come in, continue to pay for cast members. But now we're reaching that breaking point where this downtime has been so long, it's no longer possible for Disney to stay solvent and continue to pay all their employees. So hence, that's why we're seeing all these furloughs. The thing with the furlough is you're still a cast member, you're still an employee, you still have your position, you're just not being paid, the hourly rates or your salary or anything like that. The good news is you still have benefits, which is really great to see. Disney still providing health care and all that sort of stuff to those employees. So that is awesome to see. The issue becomes, though, with those furloughed employees needing to pay rent, they might terminate and try to go look for employment elsewhere or try to get more benefits. The process of reopening the parks, if that is to happen, becomes infinitely more complicated than management just choosing a date. Because if you keep having cast members leave, what's going to happen is Disney is going to have to pick a date when they want to reopen and then hire and train a very large number of people to even make the things at the resort, the parks, the hotels, all of that capable of reopening. This is why I think if the parks do reopen sometime this year, it's likely going to be something phased, where we see the hotels open in stages, certain hotels open earlier than others. The same with the parks. I did a little priority list on Twitter of which parks I think will open first. I think Disney's Hollywood Studios and the Magic Kingdom will open around the same time. Magic Kingdom requires a lot of people to operate, more than Hollywood Studios, but it is like the classic park. You kind of have to have it open, right? So a lot of people made a good point there. And then the Animal Kingdom, the animals, that park's still operating in some capacity because of course you have people caring for the animals, so that one shouldn't be too hard to reopen. And then obviously Epcot is very labor intensive, it's very management intensive, and all those salaried employees have been furloughed. So on every level with Epcot, the fact that it's a giant crater right now and such a mess, that's the one I think is going to be very difficult to reopen. And the idea of opening each thing one at a time, it allows Disney to ensure that each feature of the resort is properly staffed, trained, and in great operational shape while not creating a huge extra window of downtime and trying to get everything back operational all at once. It could be that Disney does want to wait until they can open everything all at once, but if Disney were to do that, that would be months of training and hiring. It would be a ton of work, and if Disney wants to be able to reopen and get the revenues flowing again, opening things in phases as soon as possible would be the best scenario for the cast, the guests, and the company. So let's say, for the sake of argument, instead of us being stuck inside for the year, which would be terrible, let's say Disney can reopen sooner. Let's say Disney reopens in May. Something you have to consider is it's not just about the supply. It's not just about the parks being open. It's also about the question of who is going to the parks in a situation like this. If Disney were to reopen sooner rather than later, and we're still very much in the situation where the cases are skyrocketing, the thing with the parks is they're for families. Are you going to bring your grandparents to the parks to touch all these public surfaces and be in lines with people? Probably not, right? See, it's not just a matter of the parks being open physically, it's also if enough people will be willing to go to make the parks even something Disney can pay to operate. Something interesting people have noticed is right before Disney closed, there was a My Disney Experience update where Disney added a virtual queues button to the menu, and it was quickly taken down, it was quickly removed. And I have a theory as to what was going on there. And this is where that concept of the new normal, things not being the same as they were, comes into play, especially with Disney. I think if Disney does reopen anytime soon, instead of standing in lines for rides, there may be virtual queues for most of them. We could also see a situation where Disney reopens but limits the number of guests that are allowed in each park to how many can fit inside of it while keeping a minimum safe distance between each person. We could also soon be living in a world where you are required to wear a mask to go out in public, to go to the parks, things like that. I was speculating about these very things back in January and how Disney could distribute Mickey-shaped vitamin C tablets, and it's unfortunate that these have become actual considerations. It's very sad that we're even in this scenario, but if you combine all those precautions with the foot-operated water fountains Disney rolled out right before the parks closed, and the tables everywhere they had with the sanitation and everything, and then you add in the idea of you being spaced out from everyone and having the virtual queues, guests wearing masks, Disney could be able to, in a very low-risk, limited capacity, reopen the parks back up to guests to get that revenue flowing again and give those cast members some relief as far as being able to make a living and pay rent, and of course give guests who want to go the opportunity to get back to the parks. 3 weeks ago was the inflection point for Disney construction. When Disney first announced they were closing the parks, it was for 2 weeks. That Friday, several of our inside sources fielded requests to potentially double existing crews on some of the biggest projects Disney is working on. That Monday, after that weekend, when they came back on Monday, those same crews discovered that they've been completely pulled from the projects Disney just a few days previously looked like they wanted to rev up work on. So the question is, what happened there? That Friday, I think Disney saw the 2-week closure as a 2-week closure. All the resorts around the world together have never been closed that long. This will be the perfect chance to get a ton of work done while not having to worry about moving walls around for the guests or not making noise during the day. It would be amazing. They could get so much done so quickly. It would be awesome. In fact, soon after the park closed, we actually saw this in a limited capacity with the crews working on painting the 50th castle in the Magic Kingdom. They were putting their cherry pickers on the guest pathways with no walls around them, no walls necessary, and being able to paint freely all day without worrying about affecting the guest experience because there were no guests in the parks. But over the course of that weekend, there was some inflection point reached where it became clear not just to Disney, but to every company and everyone that we were likely going to be in this situation a lot longer than 2 weeks. And as soon as it felt like to me Disney realized that, every third-party worker and later even every maintenance cast member on payroll ended up being pulled from those projects. The reason Disney pulled all the construction first is simple. Construction, with the few exceptions of things like the Cinderella Castle, which I believe is being done by maintenance cast members, most of the construction work on property is done by third-party contractors and crews. And when it became clear no new revenue was coming in anytime soon, what you're faced with is a revenue bathtub, basically a bathtub of cash, where the faucet has been turned off entirely. All Disney has is what's in the tub for the parks, and they have to tighten that drain as much as they can before, of course, they completely run out of cash and are insolvent and unable to do anything. And thankfully, Disney does seem to have a good amount of cash based on how they've handled all this. The challenge with this cash bathtub analogy is if you tighten that drain all the way, and all the cast members are gone, then Disney isn't even going to be able to get the faucet going again because they'll have no one to run the park. This is to say cast members are critical infrastructure, contractors and construction crews are not. The parks can operate and generate revenue fine without construction, but without the cast members, the parks can't do anything, and that is why construction was the first to go. So we have a pretty good idea as to why we saw construction stop and Disney put their focus on the cash front into taking care of the cast members. That said, there still actually is some construction happening on Walt Disney World property. The governing body of Disney, Reedy Creek, still has projects up and running. Since the closure, we've seen the old Hollywood Studios entrance bridge all busted up. We've also seen other road work on property happen, and even work on the expansion to the Magic Kingdom parking lot that is still continuing in full swing. When the construction crews were first pulled at Disney, a lot of people on Twitter were saying it's because of OSHA, it's because of worker regulations with safety and stuff, or it's because the crews working is unsafe for their health. And evidence to it not being because of worker regulations or worker safety is the fact that not only are workers still working on Reedy Creek projects, but there are also third-party projects in full swing on Disney property. And just driving around Florida, I've seen plenty of other construction going on. Right now on property, there's work happening on third-party hotels and the new McDonald's on property, which is coming together quite nicely. You can see in this photo from Bio Reconstruct, it has a solar panel roof, which is pretty cool. Now we have to talk about all the permits that Disney has been filing, despite the fact that construction currently isn't happening.
The Council has banished you to exile on a desert asteroid. So relax, enjoy the trip.
Now, it should be stated there is still some mystery as to what's going on with this topic, but I've talked to some insiders familiar with this situation to help shed a bit of light on what's going on. Well, after the closure of Walt Disney World and Disney having halted all their construction, we got a permit for the demolition of the interior of an address which we believe is Stitch's Great Escape. And I'll have a whole nother video for you guys because I have a very cool rumor as to what the show format is going to be, what's going to actually be going in there. Who knows if any of it's going to happen anymore, but I want to make a video about this. So the filing of this permit led many folks to thinking Disney is actively demolishing Stitch. We've also gotten new set installation permits, all sorts of permits, despite us hearing that all work has been stopped. The likely reason we're continuing to see permits filed, despite Disney no longer bidding for contractors to work on anything, is because once all those salaried cast members get furloughed in a week or two, it'll be a lot harder to file permits at all. By filing them now, it ensures if Disney can get back up and running construction-wise, they have their permits with Orange County and they can get to work immediately, providing the paperwork generating infrastructure at Disney some time to get back on their feet.
It's not true. That's impossible!
Now, there's no doubt with such a monumental shift in our daily lives and how the world is functioning, combined with the fact that we have a new CEO of Disney, all this means big changes will be coming to the projects that we'll actually see happen. Once you factor in the virus especially. Now, online, there's plenty of lists you can find of people saying this is what we think's canceled, this is what we think won't be canceled. Thus far, I've only heard of potential cancellations for 2 projects with sources familiar with them. The first is Mary Poppins in the UK Pavilion. Treat this as a rumor. The thing with the Mary Poppins attraction, most recently, it was the bare minimum of what you could call a ride. It is an indoor carnival ride. All that stuff that you were hearing about, it's a dark ride or a trackless ride, none of that was ever the case. At one point it was a carousel, now it's not even a carousel. I'd say it's less impressive. I'll just tell you what it is at this point because it really seems like a lot of people working on these projects, they're gonna get laid off anyways, and they said it's fine to talk about. So I just wanted to tell you, it's teacups. That's what's going in Mary Poppins. Just treat that as a rumor, but that's what I've heard. Teacups is what is coming to Mary Poppins. Now, the thing is, they're indoor teacups, and the reason this is important is because the whole idea with this is to have an indoor attraction inside of that facade that you saw at D23, whether that would be a carousel or a teacups. It was never gonna be a big ride. It has to have a very small area for the actual attraction. It's just supposed to be something to add something for kids to do in the World Showcase. But the reason that I was very disappointed with this project, beyond the fact that they try to make it sound like it was a big thing, is the fact that teacups inside, one thing they could do is really cool is do what they did with the Epcot experience where you have projection all the way around you. At one point I was hearing it maybe something they could do is do like the cherry tree leaves all around you, like how it happens in the Epcot experience as you're spinning around in the teacups. Wouldn't that be really cool? And I heard that even that was taken off the table. So this is like a budget cut of a budget cut of a budget cut of a budget cut. So it's very natural and it seems very likely that this is the first project to go because it was already so unlikely to happen in the first place. It was something they sort of pulled out at D23. It really didn't seem like they had a really good idea, like lock down what they were going to do. And as time has gone on with this project, it's become more and more eminent to me that it's something that doesn't have a lot of money in it. So it's not surprised in a situation like this where there's financial strain on the company, it would be the first thing to go. Now, of course, treat that as a rumor. I'm not saying definitely Mary Poppins is going to be teacups. I'm just saying that's what I've heard from people familiar with the projects. And of course, I'm sure there's people who know a lot more than I do who can shed some light on these topics. Actually, pretty funny, entertainment insider Jim Hill, he has been talking about a carousel going back there for years, like years and years. And he was totally right. I really think the main plan, the original plan was to do a Mary Poppins facade indoor carousel. And the reason it's supposed to be indoor is because it gives something for the kids to do out of the rain. Also, not only something for kids to do in the World Showcase, but out of the rain. That was an important factor. And then it seems like it's devolved even from that original plan down to like teacups without projection tech, like something very, very basic. Who knows if that's really the case? And if you think this rumor is a little far-fetched, if you think it's all made up, just remember Bob Chapek has said many times that he's heard loud and clear the demand for more kids, family type stuff to have in the parks, especially in the World Showcase, where of course you really don't have much for kids as it currently stands. This would definitely have been a welcome addition. I think that's where the idea was coming from. And then of course the idea with the facade is you have a nice Instagram spot, a nice place to do meet and greets, a nice meet and greet backdrop drop. Who knows, maybe it still happens because it doesn't seem like something that's very high impact or very expensive to do. And there is some benefit, of course, with having a kids ride in the parks. My only thing with Mary Poppins, why I'm kind of cynical about it, is just that people thought it was something more than it was. People think it's like a dark ride or like a trackless ride or like an actual attraction. And it's really not. It's really not like a big ride. So I just wanted to put that out there. The other project that I have heard so far has faced the chopping block is PhilharMagic. Now this one might surprise you because no one talks about PhilharMagic anymore. I have no idea why. For the 50th anniversary, PhilharMagic was supposed to receive a new film. And however unlikely that is now, it still could be a possibility. But the reason this one, I think, is the first of any of the unannounced 50th anniversary projects to be in trouble is because most of the 50th anniversary projects are things like giving animatronics new scripts, or adding a single animatronic to a ride, or adding a collection of small animatronics to a ride, or adding a new visual effect to a roller coaster. All these things, they're going to be very cool, but they're very physically low impact things. The difference with PhilharMagic is it was supposed to get a whole new facade, the front of the building, and that means that you have to have a whole crew, a whole construction site, a whole nother set of walls, which is far more demanding in nature than, let's say, closing a ride for a bit and adding the Hatbox Ghost to the attic scene in the Haunted Mansion, which is something that's been rumored for a long time and likely to happen. If you think about something like that, Disney's gonna make a lot of money off of merchandising the Hatbox Ghost. It's not something that causes a huge downtime. It's not something that requires a huge crew to do. It's still expensive, but it's something that isn't like a giant physical project where Disney has to have all these moving parts, which would be the case with redoing the facade to PhilharMagic. So take all of what I just said with a grain of salt. I'm not making any claims. I'm just saying these are rumors that I've heard of these two projects that I believe have seen the chopping block. And my big worry is soon I'm just going to be back here and we're just going to be listing off every project we've heard of and projects you guys haven't heard of. Like, we're just going to be listing through everything, because a big concern is if everyone who works on these projects is laid off, then the projects themselves can't even happen, right? Like, they're not even a possibility. So that's something to be worried about. And it's really disappointing that it's come to this. It's definitely not Disney's fault. There's really nothing they can do at this point except hope that this coronavirus situation resolves itself. But safe to say, it is quite a major bummer. So let's hope that the parks can reopen soon in some safe capacity, maybe with the virtual queues, maybe with the masks, so we can see all these awesome projects end up coming to life. Another matter at hand here is, just think, the most optimistic estimations say maybe the parks can reopen this June. That's when Disney's taking reservations. But the issue there is, when does construction resume? At a minimum, everything will have been down for 2 months and be 2 months behind where it was originally slated to open. And we don't know a lot of those specifics of when things were supposed to open. Disney didn't announce a lot of those, which is definitely smart. But if you think from Disney's end, from inside the company, when things were slated to be complete, now those things have been pushed back 2 months from where they were. We were talking maybe August, maybe September with Tron. Now we're probably talking about the Tron coaster not being open till during the 50th anniversary of Walt Disney World, sometime in October, November, December, sometime probably still in 2021, but that is something to consider. And if there is a silver lining to any of this construction stuff, perhaps that original rumor of Disney doubling up crews on projects, maybe they could do that once things can get back to normal, or the new normal, and they can try to make up that lost time. So maybe we still have Tron open at the same time. Maybe in the second half of the football game, Disney's working with double the amount of players to try to get everything built in time for that originally slated open. But the longer we sit here, the longer projects sit at Disney untouched and no construction happening, more of an issue the delays become. If this construction downtime continues longer than 3 months, we'll likely be talking about a world where Tron and Guardians are 2022 projects instead of 2021, right? The Guardians coaster coming to Epcot, that one also has the added issue of needing media from a production set. The production set of Guardians 3, that's when they're gonna film the stuff that's gonna be on the screens during the attraction, during the coaster. Currently, production is shut down worldwide on just about every project, everywhere, on every company, as far as content production goes. So there is going to be a lot to consider there, a lot of extra problems now some of these attractions are going to have in being able to open. We've always known that the Guardians is sort of reliant on this idea of actually making Guardians 3, but the fact that everything's delayed now definitely is not a good sign. Ratatouille and Epcot, we heard that they had cast members already training inside, or that they had trained in France. I think Disney flew some of them out there. We were talking about it perhaps opening sometime soon after Spaceship Earth, which was slated to close on May 26th. Now Ratatouille and Epcot likely won't be open till whenever Disney reopens the parks, plus 2 months, right? Plus 2 months or a month and a half. That's how much it had before they shut everything down. So there's still going to be some considerable time where they're going to have to work on that. And then, of course, the major concern with all of this, sort of the climax here, is Epcot itself. Epcot is currently such a disaster. It probably deserves its own video. It's in such a terrible state right now. You know, Disney waited so many years to do anything with Epcot. Just think about it. Iger came in as CEO in 2005, and it wasn't until he basically stepped down effective immediately that we're finally seeing stuff happen with Epcot. You know, say what you will about Bob Chapek, but nothing happened until Bob Chapek became Parks Chairman. We finally saw projects and money come into Epcot, and it's just like such the worst timing, the state that it's in right now, where Disney waited and waited and waited, and then finally gets this huge reimagining. It gets underway with all sorts of demolition and all these stages of construction and temporary walkways, and everything gets shut down because of the virus. And now it's all just sitting there. Many online are proposing what Disney could do to just cut their losses is rebuild the 1/4 of Innoventions that they've demolished and go with one of Imagineering's original concepts for this overhaul that we saw plans of thanks to Martin on the WDW Magic forums. This is allegedly the low budget option, which would have kept the layout of Epcot symmetrical, kept most of the same infrastructure, and you just put new stuff in the buildings. But the thing is, even though the plan we got is actually a more expensive plan, the plan to remove one side of Innoventions and put in trees and a Moana water feature and an elevated building that was a giant question mark as to if it was really going to happen before all this, now it's even less likely to happen, right? Combine that with the fact that Mary Poppins is likely canceled and Disney is strapped for cash here, and it really does seem like continuing to go forward with the current Epcot plan will be so costly on Disney's end and the guest end. Don't forget the guest cost with all this, having to go around the middle area. There really doesn't seem like there's going to be much reward for it on either end, on both the guest end or the Disney end. So it really becomes a question of, is it really worth doing? Mouse Gear has already been gutted, so it's going to be reimagined no matter what. So we're getting that. Disney can easily find entertaining and Epcot-based activities to put in Innoventions. It doesn't have to be the corporate stuff. It can be Disney IP, whatever it is. We can have new restaurants and those things. There's so much you can do with the existing infrastructure in Epcot. Fill back in that middle area, maybe a new fountain. That would be pretty awesome. A very high-tech one with LEDs and all sorts of new water effects. That would be amazing. And then boom, you have the new entrance, you have the new spine of Epcot. Very simple, not as much money for Disney. There's probably a way that Disney can still work in. The whole reason they're doing this is because they want to have more festival booths near the front of the park, right? Because that way you don't have to walk so far into the park to even get to the festival stuff. By making it closer to the front of the park, that is not only going to mean it's more accessible to guests, all the food and wine booths and all that sort of stuff, but also more revenue on Disney's end. I think that's a big part of why the current plan was ever even going to happen. So you could figure out a way to work in booths with the current situation that you have in the middle of the park, get all that area fixed up and done as soon as possible, that middle area, whatever Disney does. And then a lot of the extra money, that could go into stuff that we actually want, like focus it on rides. We want stuff to happen to the Imagination Pavilion. We want to see something happen to the guest experiences that you have in the parks, the actual attractions. That would be great to see. And also, there's the question of if Spaceship Earth gets refurbished at all at this point. It was supposed to go down May 26th, and here we are a month ago. I actually broke to you a month ago the rumored new interior queue layout for Spaceship Earth with the new queue and exit building Disney was going to add. The whole reason they were doing this is for this new flow where instead of having queues outside, you can widen the guest pathways around Spaceship Earth and actually put the queue inside, maybe even add a pre-show to the attraction. And this would require actually changing the shape of the load unload of the track. And then after I broke that, other insiders started claiming that that's already all been cut out of the budget, and instead Disney's just going to opt for a quick reimagining of, projection mapping some scenes, doing a new ending, tweaking the second half of the attraction, and they're just going to try to get the ride back up as soon as possible. And it's sort of like the Mary Poppins thing where it's like you go, like it just seems like it keeps being cut to the point where it's like, why even bother until we can figure out a new strategy. So maybe we will see them go forward with the Spaceship Earth thing, but while construction's down here, there's really nothing that's going to happen, and it really becomes a question of, Spaceship Earth isn't demolished like Mouse Gear. They can still save it. It's still an attraction that can function. Maybe you run Spaceship Earth a little while longer while you focus on fixing up the center area of the park, and then you can focus on individual attractions and things like Spaceship Earth and the Imagination Pavilion, and actually give those attractions the true budget and funding and love that they deserve. In our final Disney coronavirus construction topic here, the coronavirus isn't just a virus. It's a vehicle of change in terms of the consumer, what guests wanted and what guests were willing to pay in 2018 when many of Disney's current projects were planned and put together. Those things may no longer apply when we reemerge into the new normal. This concept of changing guest demands as a result of coronavirus will most certainly apply to Epcot, but it seems like the plan that the now CEO Bob Chapek set into motion of having this ability to have all sorts of booths closer to the front of the park, more accessible, yielding more revenue. That's an understandable endeavor, and I still think it's a very feasible one, even in the new normal. But there's another project that I think doesn't have the same forgiveness as far as the guests are concerned, and that is the Star Wars Hotel. Shortly after Disney announced they were shutting everything down, I tweeted out that we could see the Star Wars Hotel at Walt Disney World become this decade's Pop Century Legendary Years. And if you don't know what the Pop Century Legendary Years was, it was going to be the second half of the Pop Century Resort, but a change in guest travel behaviors and economic factors as a result of what happened in 2001 resulted in Disney abandoning the project because they were strapped for cash, there weren't a lot of guests coming to the parks, the economic conditions had changed, and it took 10 years before that project was finally completed and it became the art of animation. Some people thought I was talking about the progress on the construction. That's not what I'm talking about. It is clear the Star Wars Hotel is actually well on its way construction-wise, way more than the Pop Century Legendary Years was. But the reason Legendary Years was dropped also may apply to the Star Wars Hotel in this aspect, why it might be affected. The only way a project like the Star Wars Hotel was ever funded is because Disney Focus Group tested it and saw that a considerable number of upper middle class and rich families would be willing to go pay for this highly themed experience where you go into a highly themed ship, a highly themed warehouse, where essentially you're on a cruise on land for a 3-day, 2-night immersive adventure, expenses paid per person. You'd have an excursion like with a cruise, with the excursion in a Galaxy's Edge via a highly themed bus that goes into the back of the land. Now, setting aside the social aspect that after all of this, where we've been pent up for months and months and months, a lot of people are not going to have the interest in spending a giant sum of money to spend more days in what is essentially solitary confinement. So let's assume, the hotel opens and all the virus stuff is subsided. That's all behind us. We don't have to worry about the coronavirus. The economic effect of the coronavirus, as far as the pause on life in the market, it'll be felt long after we reach the herd immunity of the virus itself. And the question becomes, are there still the same amount of people as when Disney started building this project that'll be willing to spend so much for such an experience? Does the cruise payment model work on land? Will it work at Walt Disney World? Does it work in an era where everyone's disposable income has gone down the drain? A lot of Disney's upper middle class guests come from the Northeast, where there's very high real estate costs and they're currently living off of any disposable income they have. So will Disney be able to find enough people willing to spend the rumored $3,300 per person to do this experience and fill all those cabins every 3 or 4 days? Now, of course, on the bright side with the Star Wars Hotel, what Disney could do if they can't find enough people to pay that price tag is just lower the price, just change the supply and demand by pricing the experience way lower than what they originally thought. Sure, it might take longer to pay off the project, you might have to make some changes to the project, but if Disney charged less and was able to get all those cabins filled, then they could still make the Star Wars Hotel a worthwhile experience for people. And I think that's what we're going to see happen on the optimistic front. So that's why I think there's still a good chance of the Star Wars Hotel taking off, pun intended, but it was a long shot to begin with, and the new economic conditions that this is going to bring on and the decline in disposable income people have will no doubt adversely affect luxury experiences like this Galactic Star Cruiser. And now for our final topic.
Sit down, Bob.
The biggest question surrounding all of this is Bob Chapek becoming CEO. If you notice, when Bob Iger steps down in late February in his CNBC interview, without specifically saying why he's stepping down early, he keeps saying the phrase day to day. This is very important because getting away from the day to day, giving Bob Chapek the day to day, Iger wanting to focus on the creative, I think in retrospect, we all know what this means. We can say fairly confidently Bob Iger did not want to be the face, nor be the one responsible for the day-to-day of the coronavirus response. Disney is huge, and the amount of money at risk and at play, and the management, and the negotiations, and the 11 p.m. conference calls I'm sure Bob Chapek has to do, it's a lot to do. And it's a lot that Bob Chapek has to deal with, so it's understandable why someone like Bob Iger, who's been CEO for so long, would say, I don't want to have to deal with that. I don't want to do that. That's my personal theory as to why I think Bob Iger stepped down a little bit early and why it seemed a little bit abrupt. It's because it was abrupt. I think they saw what was coming, and it was time to switch out the CEOs for that reason. I think it's definitely understandable. And as far as Disney under Bob Chapek so far, I feel like everything has been handled fairly well. The only two bad things on the parks end thus far have been how slow Disney was to respond to the coronavirus. I mean, like snail's pace, like extremely slow. Think of this. We had the first case of community spread of the coronavirus, human-to-human spread here in the United States at the end of January 31st. It was over another full month before we started to see the rollout of hand sanitizers at the fingerprint scanners at the park entrances. That like lapse in candor is crazy. That is ridiculous and very uncharacteristic of Disney. You know, if you think about the Zika virus, which was threatening Florida at one point, Disney filled in the pools that had standing water in them in the old abandoned River Country water park on Bay Lake. Like they did that proactively. They didn't even have to do that, but Disney wanted to be safe. They did it anyways, and it was great to see. And it's odd because you look at that and then you look at what's happened here with the coronavirus, and it's like a completely different company and how slow the response was. So who knows what exactly was the internal politics with that. And then of course the other problem was the last day Disney was opened. That last night you had that huge crowd in the Magic Kingdom at Town Square all chanting as Disney recorded a promotional piece. Disney posted it and then wisely immediately took it down. They did post it, but I've not seen the video that Disney posted of like the last day before Disney closed. I think we get the gist of what it was. It was like, oh, we'll see you real soon, you know, and stuff like that. It's a nice idea, and I think it's, you know, it's very lighthearted of Disney. You know, they're trying to make light of what's going on, keep people optimistic, but the optics involved of having these huge crowds of people and everything on the last day Disney's open, when the virus was very, very serious and the spread was imminent, it did not look good. Granddaughter of Roy O. Disney, Abigail Disney, she had a viral tweet admonishing Disney for even letting guests in when it was obvious that the virus was a serious threat. You know, the last night you had the photo of Happily Ever After that WWNT took, and it's just like a huge amount of people that showed up. But in Disney's defense, that was the last day the parks were open, so of course a lot of people are going to show up. Anytime Disney opens or closes something, tons of people show up, irrespective of there being a virus, a global pandemic. That doesn't matter to people. They're going to show up because it's the last this, it's the first this, you know, that's how people are. So it's not all on Disney, but the laggy response on the coronavirus front, at least from an outside perspective, does not look great. And now is when the new leadership faces a challenge, because there is the question of what is going to happen with the furloughed cast members. We know that the unions at Disney, at all the Disney parks, you know, Walt Disney World, Disneyland, they pose a lot of cost issues for Disney. And this is a great opportunity, not of Disney's creation, but they could take this opportunity to say, since everyone's furloughed, they can say, hey, if you're a union employee, you know, everyone's furloughed anyways, no one's getting paid. You could terminate your contract and we'll let you come back with all your benefits, your position, your seniority, but be outside of the union. That is something that I'm sure some other companies will try to do, to try to, you know, bust unions and things like that. And if Disney were to do anything like that, you know, Disney's been pretty good with the unions, especially during this. But, you know, if Disney were to do that, they would take a huge PR hit, and I feel like that would not be good for Chapek. There's all these crazy theories online that Chapek isn't supposed to be the long-term CEO, like he's supposed to be a fall guy or something. I don't believe that, because I don't want that to be the case. I want to see the CEO succeed. I want to see Bob Chapek succeed. The fact that he and all the executives, they're taking a pay cut during this pandemic, that was really good to see. That's a good vote of confidence. And all in all, despite a delayed response, I think Disney has done a very good job of doing as much as they can with the cards that they were dealt, with paying the cast members, trying to keep the future bright despite the bleak circumstances. And here's to hoping the parks reopen safely soon. That's all the latest on Disney and the coronavirus. Let me know what you guys think as far as when the parks will reopen. From the Mickey Views Magic Studio, this is Braden. I'll talk to you soon. Have a magical day.